Piping design codes and standards. Segment. Having dealt with the various piping codes and standards required by piping, now let's go in detail of it. Starting from pressure piping codes B31, we have ASME B31.1 dealing power piping. This code provides requirement for piping typically found in electrical power generating stations in industrial and institutional plants, geothermal heating systems, and central and district heating systems. It also covers boiler external piping for power plants and high temperature, high pressure water boilers in which steam or vapor is generated at a pressure of more than 15 psig and high temperature water is generated at a pressure exceeding 160 psig and or temperature exceeding 250 degree Fahrenheit. This ASME B31.1 is basically intended for manufacturers, designers, operators, and owners of piping systems, including but not limited to steam, water, oil, gas, and air services, plus all potential governing entities. B31.1 is mainly important for power piping professionals. It does not apply to piping systems covered by other sections of the code for pressure piping and other piping which is specifically excluded from the scope of this code. Next, ASME B31.2, which was meant for fuel gas piping. It was withdrawn in 1988 and superseded by ANSI ASCZ 223 on National Fuel Gas Code. NFPA 54 NSI Z 223.1 provides minimum safety requirements for the design and installation of fuel gas piping systems in home and other buildings. Requirements cover the installation and operation of fuel gas piping systems, appliances, equipments, and related accessories, with rules for piping systems, materials, and components, piping system testings and purging, combustion and ventilation air supply, and venting of gas-fired appliances and equipment. Next is ASME B31.3. It is formerly called chemical plant and petroleum refinery piping. This code normally provides rules for piping found in petroleum refineries, chemical, pharmaceutical, textile, paper, semiconductor, and cryogenic plants and related processing plants and terminals, including piping for fluids like raw, intermediate, and finished chemical, petroleum product, gas, steam, air, and water, fluidized solids, refrigerants, cryogenic fluids, etc. For process piping professionals, this code is at most important. Next is B31.4 for pipeline transportation systems, liquid and slurries. This code prescribes requirements for the design, material, construction, assembly, inspection, and testing of piping transporting liquids such as crude oil, condensate, natural gasoline, natural gas liquids, liquefied petroleum gas, carbon dioxide, liquid alcohol, liquid anhydrous ammonia, and liquid petroleum products between producers, lease facilities, tank farms, natural gas processing plants, refinery stations, ammonia plants, terminals, that is marine, rail, and truck, and other delivery and receiving points. So basically deals with piping transporting liquids, and examples of those liquids have been illustrated. Intended for liquid pipeline designers, owners, regulators, inspectors, and manufacturers. Primary industries served include those for carbon dioxide, liquid alcohol, liquid anhydrous ammonia, and liquid petroleum products. Now, B31.5, refrigeration piping and heat transfer components. This code prescribes requirements for piping for refrigerants, high transfer components, and secondary coolants for temperatures as low as minus 320 degree Fahrenheit, whether erected on the premise or factory assembled. Users are advised that other piping code sections may provide requirements for refrigeration piping in their respective jurisdictions. It is intended for designers, owners, regulators, inspectors, and manufacturers of refrigeration piping and heat transfer components. Next is B31.6. Well, this was meant for chemical plant piping and it never got published as a separate document. Instead, it got folded into B31.3. A draft of the section for chemical piping plant B31.6. It was completed in 1974. However, it was decided to merge this section in ASME B31.3 because the two sections were very closely related. A joint code, Chemical Plant and Petroleum Piping Refinery, was published in 1976. So it was a joint code. Earlier B31.3 was already there, and this section got included within it, and thus a joint code, Chemical Plant and Petroleum Piping Refinery, was published in 1976. At this time, items such as fluid service categories, example category M, non-metallic piping, and safeguarding were also introduced. Next is ASME B31.7 meant for nuclear piping. Well, this was withdrawn and superseded by ASME Boiler and Pressure Vessels Code Section 3. B31.8 is totally dealing in gas transmission and distribution piping system. This code covers the piping transporting products that are mostly gas. We have seen that of the liquid, now this is for the gas between sources and terminals. This code also covers safety aspects of the operation and maintenance of those facilities. This B31.8 is intended for manufacturers, users, constructors, designers, pipeline operators, and maintenance personnel and regulatory personnel plus all potential governing entities. Next is B31.9, that is meant for building service piping. This code has rules for the piping in industrial, institutional, commercial, and public buildings and multi-unit residences, which does not require the ranges of size, pressure, and temperature that has already been covered in B31.1. So this is totally meant for building services and other than that are covered in B31.1. This code prescribes requirements for the design, material, fabrication, installation, inspection, examination, and testing of piping systems for building services. It includes piping systems in the building or within the building property limits. Next we have B31.10. It was meant for cryogenic piping and this never been got published as a separate document. Instead, it again got folded into B31.3. A draft code for cryogenic piping was prepared by Section Committee B31.10 and was ready for approval in 1981. Again, since its covers overlapped with base in B31.3, it was decided to merge the Section Committee. It was decided to merge and develop a single exclusive code. This code was issued in 1984. Next is B31.11 for slurry transportation piping system. The primary purpose of this code is to establish requirements for design, construction, inspection, testing, operation, and maintenance of slurry transportation piping systems for protection of general public and operating company personnel, as well as for reasonable protection of the piping systems against vandalism and accidental damages by others, and also responsible for the protection of environment. It covers piping systems that transport aqueous slurries of no hazard materials such as coal, mineral ores, and other solids between a slurry processing plant and a receiving plant. So totally meant for slurry, and it's again for the transportation, as you've seen for the liquid and gases earlier. B31.12 meant for hydrogen piping and pipelines. This particular standard activity has been formed to develop a new code for hydrogen piping and pipeline that contains requirements specific to hydrogen surfaces in power, process, transportation, distribution, commercial, and residential applications. It includes equivalent information found in B31.3, B31.8, and NFPA 54 for natural gas. This section was first published in 2008, that is quite earlier. This code is applicable to piping in gaseous and liquid hydrogen services and to pipelines in gaseous hydrogen services. This code is applicable up to and including the joint connecting the piping to associated pressure vessels and equipment, but not to the vessels and equipment themselves. Now, the earlier, just now we have seen the pressure piping codes. Now, ASME codes for the boiler and pressure vessels. boiler and pressure vessel code contains 11 sections as mentioned below. So piping codes you've seen, and this is for the boiler and pressure vessels, which contains altogether 11 sections. We have first section 1 for power boilers, then we have section 2 in material specification. Section 3 is divided into two subsections, division 1 and division 2. Division 1 deals with the rules for construction of nuclear power plant components, and Division 2 deals with the code for concrete reactor vessel and containments. Next is Section 4, which deals with the heating boilers, and then we have Section 5 dealing in non-destructive examination, a section assigned particularly to the non-destructive examination. Next is Section 6, wherein the recommended rules for care and operation of heating boilers have been illustrated. And then for rules for care of power boilers is illustrated in section 7. So in section 6 we have for the heating boilers, and section 7 we have for the power boilers. Section 8 is again further divided into two different divisions, division 1 dealing with the pressure vessels, and division 2 containing the alternative rules. Next is section 9, which totally contains the welding and brazing qualifications. Section 10 contains fiber reinforced plastic pressure vessels. And finally, Section 11, which illustrates rules for in-service inspection of nuclear power plant components. So out of these 11 sections, Section 8 is very important to the process piping engineers. Now, we will be seeing other relevant section titles, ASME standards. For unified inch screw thread, we have B1.1. Next, for cast iron pipe flanges and flange fittings, we have B16.1. For malleable iron threaded fittings, we have B16.3. For cast iron threaded fittings, we have again B16.4. For pipe flanges and flange fittings, B16.5 standards. Factory-made wrought steel butt welding fittings are contained in B16.9. Face-to-face and end-to-end dimensions of valves are illustrated in B16.10. For steel fitting, socket welding, and threaders, they are governed in B16.11 standard. Cast iron threaded drainage fittings are there in B16.12. Metallic gaskets for piping, flange, ring joint, spiral wound, and jacketed. So typically there is a standards containing illustrating all the metallic gaskets for the pipe flanges, and they are contained in B16.20. Non-metallic flat gaskets for pipe flanges. For metallic we have 16.20. For non-metallic we have 16.21. For cast copper alloy pipe flanges and flange fittings, it be 16.24. So it's for the cast copper alloy piping flanges and its fittings. For wrought steel butt welding short radius elbows and returns, a particular standard is devoted, and that is ASME 16.28. For valve, flange, threaded and welding ends, for threaded flange and welding end valves, we have B16.34. For office flanges, we have ASME standard B16.36. For malleable iron threaded pipe unions, we have B16.39. For large diameter steel flanges, NPS varying from 26 inches to 60 inches, we have B16.47. For steel line blanks, B16.48 standard is there. And as we have seen, for the pressure piping, we have B31. So B16 standards contain all the details of the pipe fittings. B31 for the pressure piping, For stainless steel pipe, we have B36.19 m. Coming to ASTM standards, the American Society for Testing and Materials (ASTM) is a scientific and technical organization that develops and publishes voluntary standards on the characteristic and performance of material products, systems, and services. The standards published by ASTM include test procedures for determining or verifying characteristics such as chemical composition and measuring performances such as tensile stress and bending properties. The standards cover refined materials such as steel and basic products such as machinery and fabricated equipments. The standards are developed by the committees drawn from a broad spectrum of professional, industry, and commercial interests. Many of the standards are made mandatory by reference in applicable piping codes. A vast majority of the material of construction for process and utility piping systems used within a plant are covered by ASTM specifications. Materials and the testing methods in this ASTM standards has been divided into 15 sections. Each section is further subdivided into various volumes. And ASTM covers material of construction for industries other than the petrochemical process facilities, and so many of the 15 sections are not relevant to this industry. Now, we will be listing the first three sections and the various volumes of it. Section 1, that is for the iron and steel products, contains steel piping, tubing, and fittings, contained in volume 1.01. Ferrous casting and ferroalloys, contained in 1.02. Steel plates, sheet, strips, wire, stainless steel bar are contained in volume 1.3. Steel structural reinforcing pressure vessels and the railways are illustrated in volume 1.04. Steel bars, forging, bearings, chains, and springs are governed in section 1.05. For coated steel products, we have volume 1.06. For ships and marine technology, we have volume 1.07. And for fasteners, rolling elements, and bearings, we have volume 1.08. So these are the iron and steel products. Now, going to the second section, section 2 covers non-ferrous metal products, and for copper and copper alloys, we have volume 2.01. For aluminium and magnesium alloys, we have volume 2.02. For electrical conductors, we have volume 2.03. For non-ferrous metals, like nickel, cobalt, lead, zinc, cadmium, precious, reactive, refractory metals and alloys, materials for the turbostats, electrical heating and resistance contacts and connectors, we have a volume devoted, and that is for 0.4, 2.02.04. For metallic and inorganic coating metal powders, we have volume 2.05. Next, coming to the section 3, devoted to metals, test methods, and analytical procedures. So for metals, mechanical testing, elevated and low temperature tests, metallography, we have volume 3.01. For wear and erosions and metal corrosions, we have volume 3.02. For non-destructive testing, we have volume 3.03. For illustrating the magnetic properties, we have volume 3.04. Analytical chemistry for metals, ores, and related materials is there in volume 3.05 and 3.06. Next, the following sections are not relevant to the petrochemical industry. It's section 4 for construction. Section 4 is relevant for construction. Section 5 is there for petroleum products, lubricants, and fossil fuels. Section 6 is devoted to textiles. Section 7 is for textiles. For plastics, we have section 8. For rubber, we have section 9. We have a section devoted to electrical insulation and electronics, and that is in section 10. For water and environmental technology, we have section 11. And for nuclear, solar, and geothermal energy, we have section 12. Section 13 is for medical device and services. Section 14 covers general methods and instrumentation. And finally, the last section, section 15, contains general products, chemical specialities, and end-use products. So these are the sections that are not particularly relevant to the petrochemical industry, and they are the ASTM standards for other industries like construction, petroleum, textile, plastics, rubbers, electrical insulation, water and environmental, nuclear, medical device, general methods for instrumentation, and chemical specialities and end-use products. Now, American Welding Society. The American Welding Society standard provides information on welding fundamentals, weld designs, welders' qualifications, testing and inspection of welds, and guidance on the application and the use of welds. The following is a partial list of more common publications related to the piping for AFWS standards. Standard welding terms and qualifications, including terms for adhesive, bonding, brazing, soldering, thermal cutting, and thermal spraying. They are there in section 8.301. Guidance for the non-destructive examination of wells are covered in B01.10. Specifications for welding procedures and performance qualifications, they are contained in B2.1 standard. Heating practices for pipes and tubes are nicely illustrated in standard D10.10. Pipe welding for the mild steel is there governed in standard D10.12. Pipe welding for the stainless steel are there in D10.18. Now, we will be looking for some of the standards for the American Water Works Association used in piping. AWA has developed voluntary standards for minimum requirements for material, equipment, and practices used in water treatment and supply. AWA standards are used by manufacturers, distribution, and water treatment facilities to ensure the highest quality products and services. The following is a partial list of most common publications relevant for piping. So, standard for ductile iron and gray iron fitting is C110. Standard for thickness design of ductile iron pipe is there in C150, C150. Standards for steel water pipe 6 inches and larger are there in C200. Stainless steel pipes half inches and larger, we have C220. Standard for reinforced concrete pressure piping is contained in C300. For metal seated gate valves, we have standard C500. For rubber seated butterfly valve, we have C504. For ball valve 6 inches through 48 inches, we have standard C507. And for PVC power pressure pipes, we have standard C900. So various our standards are there for the pipe and valves that's been illustrated over here. Now, there are some standards relevant to the piping industry of National Association of Corrosion Engineers, that is NACE standards. NACE International, originally known as the National Association for Corrosive Engineers, created standards for corrosion prevention and control. NACE is a member of American National Standard Institute as an accredited standards developer. NACE standards are divided into three areas. NACE standard practices are methods of selection, design, installation, or operation of a material or system when corrosion is a factor. NACE test methods are tests related to corrosion prevention and control. NACE material requirements as standards that define the necessary characteristic of a material when corrosion is a factor in the selection, application, and maintenance of the material. Following is a few common publications relevant for piping. We have a standard for standard material requirements, material resistant to sulfide stress cracking in corrosive petroleum refinery environment, and that is MR0103. For petroleum and natural gas industry, material for use in H2S containing environments. In oil and gas production, we have MR0175. For the use of corrosion resistant alloys in oil fill environment, we have standard IF192. We have a standard for avoiding caustic stress corrosion cracking of carbon steel refinery equipment and piping, and that is SP0403. NACE standards for methods and controls to prevent in-service environmental cracking of carbon steel weldments in corrosive petroleum refinery environment are there in SP0472. Next, we are going to list down some of the SAE standards. SAE International, formerly the Society of Automotive Engineers, is a globally active professional association and standards organization for engineering professionals in various industries. Principal emphasis is placed in transport industries such as automotive, aerospace, and commercial vehicles. The following is a few common publications relevant for the piping. One amongst them are refrigeration tube fittings, general specifications. It's covered in SAE J513. For hydraulic tube fittings, SAE J514 standard is there. For hydraulic flange tube, pipe and hose connections, 4-bore split flange type, we have SAE J518.